Despite his history with the MCU, James Gunn cannot see himself ruling the Marvel Studios, and his trusted co-CEO is a big reason why. Welcome to Stats In. If you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell for more video. James Gunn has begun the process of revamping DC Studios and bringing a new era to the superhero universe. From a completely different Superman to more grounded stories, things are changing for, hopefully, the better. Of course, there is skepticism amongst the fandom, but hey, let's not knock it down before we even get a taste of what James Gunn has been cooking up so passionately. The man effortlessly jumped ship from Marvel to the neighboring world, and it would be crazy to assume he didn't have a plan of action. Speaking of Marvel, we have been wondering what James Gunn would have looked like as the head of Marvel Studios instead of Kevin Feige, or if he would even be interested in the gig. Luckily, the man himself spoke up about the possibility of taking over Marvel, and the answer is simply no. The boss of DC Studios recently joined Josh Horowitz for the Happy Sad Confused podcast, where he talked about everything from Creature Commandos, which just released its second episode, to the upcoming Superman. During the conversation, Horowitz asked the co-CEO if he would have taken the same position at Marvel Studios after Kevin Feige's hypothetical exit if given the chance. While the job sounds right up his alley given his history with the studio, James Gunn has no interest in leading the Avengers to glory.
Why?
Well, we have two words for you: Peter Safran. He answered Horowitz's question stating,
No.
"Would I have contemplated it? Of course. But first of all, let me say something. I didn't take over DC. I took over with Peter Safran. People asked me if I would want to do Kevin Feige's job at DC. I was like, I don't want to do that job, that's not me. I can't do Peter's part of this. I could never do this without Peter. He does all of the CEO stuff. I am purely in charge of helping to tell these stories myself and to usher in other writers and artists to help them tell their stories. It's a creative occupation. It certainly is not Kevin's job." Gunn knows that while there is a huge creative component to what Feige does, he also realizes the involvement of other processes that the man has to look over. He simply doesn't want to do all that. But the question is, would Gunn have taken over Marvel if Safran was to join him as well? Gunn and Safran have taken over the DC Studios together. While the former manages the creative responsibilities, the latter looks over everything else. As far as Gunn is concerned, he couldn't have done it without Safran by his side. The director of Superman has always leaned towards DC more than Marvel, and that plays a big part in choosing who to work for. Ever since he got into the superhero world through comic books, he loved the DC characters more despite being a fan of both universes. Since Safran is his ride or die, Gunn should be okay to become co-CEO of Marvel Studios along with him. Still, despite the hypothetical idea of having him by his side, Gunn prefers to stick with DC instead, he tells Horowitz. "If we were asked to do that for Marvel, would we have done it? I don't know, but I know I've always been more interested in telling the stories of the DC characters. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a comic book writer. I equally love DC and Marvel comic books, but for some reason the DC characters were the ones that I dealt with the most." Gunn revealed that he would make up his own heroes in his mind, who would then team up with Batman and the others. He even had a surreal moment on the podcast when he realized that his dream as a kid turned out to be his job in the real world. Talk about manifestation goals, huh? Veteran director and co-head of DC Studios, James Gunn, talked about the reason Robert Pattinson's Batman will not find his way in his DCU. Welcome to Stats In. If you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell for more video. George Clooney, Christian Bale, Michael Keaton, Ben Affleck, and Robert Pattinson. Several actors have taken on the role of the masked vigilante of Gotham City. However, James Gunn hasn't yet worked with the character of Batman in his DCU. In the history of James Gunn and the DCU, there was a certain point when the director was considering including Robert Pattinson's The Batman into his cinematic universe. The director never went ahead with the choice. Back in 2022, veteran director Matt Reeves released the Robert Pattinson film The Batman. Starring the Twilight star as the caped crusader and part-time detective of Gotham City, the world simply fell in love with the film. Well, it would have been good to see James Gunn and Robert Pattinson joining forces for the DCU, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. However, that doesn't mean that the veteran director didn't think about it. The veteran director had indeed considered the possibility of Robert Pattinson's The Batman joining the DCU when it was ready. However, in the process of doing things, Gunn changed his mind. The Reevesverse, as they call it, came to be known as a part of the Elseworld, another universe set in the same one as the DCU. However, the veteran director recently revealed the reason why he didn't want to merge the two universes. At the same time, James Gunn was announced to be the co-head of the DC studios alongside Peter Safran. Fans wondered whether the two directors would have any ego clashes or if Robert Pattinson's Batman would eventually join the DCU. In a recent interview with Josh Horowitz on the Happy Sad Confused podcast, the veteran director talked about how he wanted to keep both the cinematic universes different, since he enjoyed the freedom. But I'm committed to both telling stories in the DCU and Elseworld stories. I want the freedom to tell Elseworld stories. In the end, Gunn would know better about the DCU than most. With the success that the recent DC projects have been receiving, DCU has regained the trust of the world, and rightfully so. With some proper planning and a high-end execution, Gunn's DCU could become quite a powerful match against Kevin Feige's MCU. Only time can tell whether we could potentially see a team-up between Robert Pattinson's Batman and who James Gunn chooses to be the next caped crusader of Gotham. The Batman is available to stream on Max in the U.S. Unlike the MCU, James Gunn is taking a different approach to greenlighting projects, which could have saved Disney from the Blade fiasco. Welcome to Stats In. If you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell for more video. Since taking over the reins at DC, James Gunn has been pretty vocal regarding his prioritization of writers and screenplays over anything else, which continues to be the driving force behind DCU projects. With the DCU set to commence next month, starting with Gunn's passion project Creative Commandos, Gunn has clarified that, moving forward, future DCU announcements will heavily rely on writers. Not only does this ensure that storytelling will be given higher focus in the new DCU, but this structure could have potentially solved the MCU's issues surrounding Mahershala Ali's Blade movie. Post-Endgame, Disney has massively increased MCU's yearly output, but this has conversely impacted the quality of its releases, as VFX artists and writers are not being given sufficient time to meet the standard. Despite being announced years ago, Blade has sustained several delays due to last year's Hollywood strike and script issues, and with Marvel taking it off the 2025 slot, the future of a standalone Blade looks bleak. Despite being announced years ago, Blade has sustained several delays due to last year's Hollywood strike and script issues, and with Marvel taking it off the 2025 slot, the future of a standalone Blade looks bleak. But in contrast to the MCU's way of doing things, James Gunn, who is pretty well versed with how Disney operates, clarified, via Threads, that they aren't going to roll the ball on a project until they've got a finished script in hand. It won't be exactly like Marvel because nothing is green-lit before we have a finished script. Although it can't be said for certain what the future holds for the new DCU, writers being put in the driving seat seems promising, as the MCU is still struggling with Mahershala Ali's Blade, he told Collider. Until we have a screenplay that I'm totally happy with, that movie is not going to get made, no matter what it is. So, we have been really fortunate with some screenplays. At the end of the day, if we're happy with the story that we're telling, that's what matters most. And once The Brave and the Bold gets to that point, then we'll make the movie. On the bright side, the DCU has wasted no time in greenlighting releases like Ana Nogueira's Supergirl and The Lanterns after being satisfied with the drafts from the writers. When asked about the progress on DCU's The Brave and the Bold, one of the very first projects that was unveiled during the initial revelation of Chapter 1, James Gunn expressed that there are no intentions to rush the writers. Elaborating on it, the Superman filmmaker reiterated the importance of writers in the new regime, adding, "Everything in DC is going to be based on the writers."